pie, still warm and fragrant on the plate, became an instant monument to everything that felt wrong. My sister, Sophia, her voice cutting through the clatter of forks and the drone of Dad's football commentary, declared it to the whole table. "Honestly, Taylor," she'd begun, a theatrical sigh escaping her lips, "you're just weak. Always have been." Her words landed like lead weights in the sudden quiet that followed, each one chipping away at something I hadn't realized was still so fragile inside me. My name is Taylor Miller, 32 years old, hailing from the sun-drenched sprawl of Tucson, Arizona. That Thanksgiving, nestled in my parents' familiar dining room, felt less like a festive gathering and more like a public inquisition. Sophia's pronouncement wasn't truly new. It was simply the loudest, most undeniable version of a narrative she'd been crafting about me since we were children. She'd always viewed my cautious nature, my preference for a quiet life, my aversion to unnecessary conflict, as inherent flaws, evidence of some fundamental feebleness. A flush crept up my neck, a familiar heat that signaled either fury or profound embarrassment, likely both. What stung most was how my mother, Emma, simply averted her gaze, fussing with a napkin. My dad, Daniel, merely cleared his throat, the volume on the TV magically increasing. It was the usual script. Sophia, the high-flying corporate attorney, always the strong one, the successful one, the one who gets things done. And then there was me, the freelance graphic designer who worked from home, who chose passion projects over prestige, who was still chipping away at student loans from a degree in art history. In their eyes, I suppose, I was the one who hadn't quite made it. My mind raced, searching for a retort, something sharp and unanswerable, but nothing materialized. My throat felt constricted, making even a whisper seem impossible. The air in the room thickened, heavy with unspoken judgments. It's a peculiar torment, having your very essence distilled into a single, unflattering label by someone who supposedly knows you best. That label, weak, felt like a brand seared onto my skin. It negated every difficult choice I'd ever made, every silent battle I'd fought, every risk I'd taken that no one else ever saw. I pushed the pie plate away, the thought of eating suddenly repugnant. A profound sense of injustice began to fester within me. It wasn't just Sophia's words. It was my entire family's tacit agreement, their silent acceptance of her verdict. It was a lifetime of being seen through that lens, always measured against some invisible standard of strength I apparently failed to meet. The truth was, my path hadn't been easy, but it had been uniquely mine. It had demanded a different kind of resilience, one that didn't always manifest in loud declarations or aggressive career climbs. As the conversation reluctantly shifted back to football, the clinking of silverware resuming, a cold resolve settled over me. It wasn't about proving Sophia wrong in that moment. It was about something far deeper, something that had been brewing for years, a quiet certainty that my life, my choices, held a different kind of power, a power that, perhaps, they were utterly incapable of recognizing. That Thanksgiving, amidst the forced smiles and the lingering scent of cranberry sauce, I realized I was done being defined by their limited perceptions. A quiet anger, sharp and precise, began to bloom, hinting at a future confrontation far beyond the dinner table. The sting from Sophia's words at Thanksgiving lingered, a raw spot inside me that refused to heal. It wasn't just the public humiliation, but the deep familiarity of her judgment, a pattern etched into the very fabric of our family for decades. Reflecting on that moment, I found my thoughts drifting back to childhood, to the very first cracks I could pinpoint in our foundation. My earliest memories of family gatherings, even before I understood the nuances, carried an undercurrent of something profoundly off-kilter. I recall one summer afternoon, perhaps when I was 7 or 8, perched on the edge of our worn patio furniture in Tucson, Arizona. Dad was grilling, the smell of mesquite smoke filling the air, and Mom was laughing, a sound that felt rare even then. My older sister, 3 years my senior, was showing off a drawing she'd made, a surprisingly detailed desert landscape. Everyone around the table showered her with praise, their voices a warm current. My own little stick figures, hastily scrawled on a napkin, lay unnoticed beside my juice box. No one said anything negative, not directly. They simply didn't say anything at all. That particular silence, the absence of recognition, felt more potent than any direct scolding. Years later, the dynamic solidified. My sister was the academic star, the one with the scholarships and the clear path ahead of her. I was the art kid, the dreamer, the one who spent hours making collages from magazine clippings, sometimes even skipping homework for it. My parents weren't overtly critical, but their expectations for me seemed softer, less defined. It wasn't about malice. It was more a resigned acceptance of what they perceived as my less conventional trajectory. I often overheard whispers, hushed tones from aunts and uncles at family dinners about her brilliance contrasted with my creativity. That word, creativity, often felt like a polite way to say unfocused or not serious. My parents' attention consistently gravitated towards my sister's achievements, her science fair awards, her debate team victories. My own small triumphs, getting a poem published in the school literary magazine, selling a painting at a local art fair, were met with polite smiles, a dismissive pat on the head, then a quick pivot back to her latest triumph. This fostered a subtle chasm between us, a deep understanding that our roles were fixed. She was the one destined for traditional success, and I was just Taylor, adrift in her shadow. There was a time, during high school, when I started taking ceramics classes. I poured my whole self into it, the clay molding beneath my hands, feeling like a true extension of my thoughts and spirit. I crafted a series of abstract sculptures, raw and expressive, and I felt genuinely proud. I convinced Mom and Dad to come to the student art show. They arrived, glanced at my pieces, and offered generic compliments. "Very earthy, honey," Mom said. Then, within minutes, her eyes, and Dad's, drifted to a large, hyper-realistic oil painting across the room. "Look at that one, Sophia," Mom remarked, her voice tinged with genuine admiration. "That's truly impressive. Such talent." My sister nodded, already assessing the technique. I remember the weight of my own hands, suddenly heavy and clumsy, as I stood there, feeling utterly invisible next to my own work. That sensation, of being eclipsed by someone else's acknowledged brilliance, became a familiar, gnawing ache. It wasn't a sudden break, more like a slow, deliberate erosion of my self-worth, piece by painful piece. Another memory surfaces, sharp as broken glass. It was my freshman year of college, back in Tucson, Arizona, after a brief, ill-fated attempt at an out-of-state university. I'd come home feeling like a failure, and Mom was trying to be supportive, but her underlying disappointment was palpable. My sister, meanwhile, was thriving at her prestigious East Coast school, excelling in every conceivable way. One evening, as I was struggling through a general education English essay, Mom walked into my room. "You know, Taylor," she began, her voice gentle, yet laced with a subtle admonition. Sophia had such clarity of purpose. She never wavered. The words, ostensibly meant to be encouraging, landed like a judgment, reinforcing the narrative that I lacked direction, that my path was inherently weaker. It wasn't a direct insult, but it landed squarely in my chest. A fresh wound from a pattern I'd been living with my whole life. The quiet expectation of my fragility, embedded in those seemingly innocent remarks, was the hardest thing to bear. I recall a specific evening, years before any of this, perhaps when I was 10. We were having dinner, and my sister was recounting some complicated math problem she'd solved. Dad listened intently, his face alight with pride. I tried to interject, eager to share a story about a vivid dream I'd had, full of flying and talking animals. Dad simply waved a dismissive hand, not even looking at me. "That's nice, honey," he mumbled, his focus still entirely on her. His eyes never met mine, not once. That quick, absent-minded gesture, The way his attention simply bypassed me still stings with a bitter clarity. It was a clear message, delivered without a single harsh word. My inner world, my imagination, my very being, simply wasn't as compelling as hers. It was a dismissal that cut deeper than any overt criticism. That sharp edge from Thanksgiving, the one Sophia had honed with her biting comment, didn't just fade into the background noise of family chatter. It began to fray the edges of my routine, a subtle snag in the fabric of my days in Tucson, Arizona. I found myself replaying not just her exact phrasing, but the way her mouth had twisted just so, the dismissive wave of her hand. It was a physical ache, an internal tremor. The usual comfort of my small apartment, the familiar scent of Palo Santo and old books, began to feel different. A particular afternoon stands out, maybe a week or so after the holiday. I was immersed in a new mixed media piece, a collage built from discarded magazines and dried desert flora, the kind of creative pursuit that usually anchors me. My phone buzzed. It was Sophia. She wanted to drop by some things Mom wanted me to have. I agreed, a strange apprehension stirring in my gut. Usually I'd anticipate seeing her, even if our interactions often left me emotionally depleted. This time, a palpable sense of dread settled over me. She arrived with a tote bag, filled with old photo albums and a stack of my childhood drawings Mom had apparently unearthed. "Thought you'd want these," she announced, placing the bag on my coffee table. Her gaze swept across my living room, lingering on my half-finished artwork. A slight smirk touched her lips. "Still making those collages?" "Huh?" Her tone carried a distinct undertone, a familiar judgment that suggested my chosen path was less than valid. She didn't say anything else directly critical, but her eyes, those dark, knowing eyes, communicated volumes. She began to leaf through one of the photo albums, pointing out a picture of us as children. "Look at how messy your hair always was," she remarked, a small, knowing chuckle escaping her. The comment was innocent enough on the surface, yet it felt like a tiny, deliberate jab, reminding me of all the ways I supposedly fell short. After she departed, leaving behind the lingering weight of her presence, I surveyed my surroundings. The air in my apartment seemed heavier, charged with an unspoken tension. The half-finished collage, moments before a source of joy and purpose, now appeared childish, inadequate, incomplete. The quiet space I cherished, where my imagination usually roamed free, now seemed to echo with an unspoken critique. My favorite mug, sitting on the windowsill, suddenly looked chipped. The throw blanket on my couch, usually soft and inviting, felt scratchy under my fingers. It wasn't just an internal shift. The very objects around me seemed to have lost their comforting familiarity. A chill snaked its way up my spine, a distinct awareness that something vital within my own sanctuary had been violated. Subtly, but effectively, I recognized the sensation, a creeping sense of not belonging, even here, in my own carefully curated corner of the world. It was as though her visit had cast a long, oppressive shadow, making my space feel foreign to me. I moved to the kitchen, needing a glass of water, anything to break the spell. The refrigerator hummed, a low, persistent drone. A disquieting thought began to form, a realization I instinctively tried to push back, yet it pressed forward, insistent. It concerned Sophia and the true depth of her actions. A chilling possibility emerged. Perhaps her constant criticisms weren't merely about making herself feel superior. Perhaps beneath it all, she harbored a deep, insidious desire for my failure. The everyday rhythm of my Tucson, Arizona life, once a comforting drumbeat, began to falter. The familiar motions of brewing my morning coffee, the quiet hum of the machine, the steam rising from the mug, all became infused with an underlying tremor. It felt as though a fine dust had settled over everything, dulling the edges, tainting the light. Checking social media, typically a mindless scroll through updates and memes, morphed into an exercise in avoidance. I found myself hovering over Sophia's profile, my thumb poised, a sickening knot in my gut, before I'd quickly swiped away, unwilling to engage, even indirectly. The very air within my small apartment, usually a haven of creativity and calm, started to feel dense, almost suffocating. My easel, positioned by the window, beckoned less and less. The bright pigments in my paint tubes seemed to mock my newfound inertia. What was once my sanctuary, a place where I could truly be Taylor Miller, now held a strange alien chill. The couch, where I'd often unwind after a long day, felt less like a soft embrace and more like a hard bench, offering no solace. Communication with family became a series of clipped exchanges. Text messages from my mom, usually brimming with details about her day or gentle inquiries about mine, received one-word replies from me. Phone calls were shorter, punctuated by awkward lulls. It wasn't just my own withdrawal. The silence from the other end of the line, particularly from Sophia, was palpable. Her texts, when they came, were perfunctory, devoid of the usual teasing or even criticism, which, in its own twisted way, had always been a form of connection between us. This emotional distance, this absence of genuine interaction, spoke volumes. It was a silent judgment, a quiet dismissal that echoed the Thanksgiving incident more profoundly than any shouted argument ever could have. I tried to articulate the gnawing discomfort. One afternoon, catching Mom on the phone, I began, "You know, things have felt off since Thanksgiving." I paused, waiting for some recognition, a sympathetic sigh. Instead, she offered a hurried explanation about a grocery list, then a quick, "Everything's fine, honey. Just busy." It was a swift, almost practiced invalidation, a gentle but firm pat on the head that conveyed, "Your feelings are irrelevant." My throat tightened, the words I wanted to voice lodging there, unspoken. It was like trying to scoop water with a sieve. The effort was futile, the outcome non-existent. Later that week, standing before the bathroom mirror, the stark fluorescent light illuminating every tired line on my face, a profound weariness washed over me. My reflection stared back, unfamiliar, guarded. The image staring back was not the confident art kid, the dreamer, or the young woman who had resolved to be done being defined by others' limited perceptions. It was just Taylor. And right then, I seemed utterly adrift. A single tear escaped, tracing a path down my cheek. I quickly wiped it away, almost ashamed of the vulnerability. My thumb hovered over my phone, a message to Sophia half-typed, detailing the pervasive ache, the feeling of being misunderstood. Then, with a sudden, decisive motion, I deleted the entire draft, the words vanishing as if they'd never existed. The silence in the small room pressed in, a heavy blanket. The mundane details of my week had blurred, a series of familiar movements that now seemed utterly meaningless. My artistic pursuits, usually a source of grounding, offered no solace. My hands, accustomed to the tactile comfort of clay or the precise placement of collage elements, now trembled with an underlying agitation. A peculiar restlessness had taken root within me, a subtle, persistent thrum beneath the surface of my everyday. One Tuesday afternoon, scrolling aimlessly through an old college group chat, a message from an acquaintance I barely remembered popped up. It was a link, accompanied by a casual comment about how everyone was talking about it. Curiosity, a fleeting emotion I rarely indulged in these days, prompted my click. The page loaded, revealing a public forum, a local arts community discussion board I occasionally visited for events. A thread, titled "Concerns about Local Artists and Financial Stability," had dozens of comments. My gaze fell on the initial post, authored by an anonymous user. Yet the phrasing, the particular turns of phrase, struck me as eerily familiar. The post detailed a hypothetical artist, someone struggling profoundly, unfit for independent management, and prone to flights of fancy over practical matters. It painted a picture of someone reckless, unreliable, almost pathetic. A cold certainty gripped me. This wasn't hypothetical. This was unmistakably a thinly veiled attack on me. The description matched the narrative Sophia had always spun. the dreamer who couldn't handle real life, the art kid who needed constant supervision. My heart began to pound, a frantic drum against my ribs. I scrolled through the replies, a growing sense of dread pooling in my stomach. People were chiming in, some expressing sympathy, others offering unsolicited advice about financial literacy programs. Then, a comment from a recognized name within the local art scene, someone whose opinion held weight, suggested that perhaps this artist's family should intervene. For their own good. My breath hitched. The screen blurred. My mind, usually so adept at piecing together disparate elements into cohesive art, now struggled to process the sheer, brutal clarity of this betrayal. This wasn't an accident. This was a deliberate, calculated campaign to undermine my credibility, to paint me as incompetent, to invalidate my entire existence as an independent adult. The weak label Sophia had so casually flung at Thanksgiving was not merely a cutting remark. It was a cornerstone of a larger, insidious strategy. A searing heat spread through my chest, morphing into a volcanic eruption of fury. My fingers clenched around my phone, white-knuckled. How dare she? How dare my sister take the very essence of my being, my drive to create, my desire for self-sufficiency, and twist it into a public spectacle of inadequacy? The humiliation burned, a corrosive acid eating away at my composure. Every dismissive glance, every patronizing smile, every unsolicited piece of advice from family members suddenly clicked into place. They hadn't just thought I was weak. They had been told I was weak, systematically and strategically by my own sibling. A wave of nausea washed over me, so potent it threatened to buckle my knees. I moved instinctively towards the bathroom, needing to escape the suffocating presence of that digital forum. My reflection in the mirror showed a face contorted by a mixture of disbelief and raw anguish. My eyes, usually vibrant, now appeared hollow, haunted. The trust I had, however fragile, in the underlying bond of family, shattered into a million irreparable fragments. It wasn't just a miscommunication or a difference of opinion. This was a deliberate character assassination, orchestrated by someone who supposedly cared for me. The person I had consistently looked up to, who had shared a childhood bedroom with me, had meticulously crafted a narrative designed to strip me of my agency, to keep me perpetually defined by their limited perceptions. A profound sense of emptiness descended, a void where my sense of belonging once resided. Every memory of Sophia, even the seemingly benign ones, now appeared tainted, viewed through this new, horrifying lens of manipulation. My identity, so carefully constructed over decades, the art kid, the dreamer, seemed like a flimsy facade, easily dismantled by a few anonymous keystrokes. A terrifying void began to open inside me, a deep, unsettling chasm where my sense of self used to be. The ground beneath me gave way. This wasn't merely pain. This was the sensation of a foundational pillar crumbling, leaving behind only the cold, unyielding expanse of a vast, desolate emptiness. A profound crack had formed, fracturing my spirit. The hollow ache from the previous weeks, a constant companion, began to morph. A quiet fury, simmering beneath the surface, slowly solidified into resolve. The first, almost subconscious, step involved a digital purge. Old photos of Sophia and me, the ones where we were younger, smiling, seemingly bonded, vanished from my phone's camera roll. They represented a fiction I no longer cared to uphold. Unfollowing her on social media came next, a click that felt both liberating and strangely heavy. It was a severing, a conscious act of detaching from the constant visual reminders of a relationship that had become toxic. This initial digital cleansing expanded. I went through my contacts, not deleting anyone, but categorizing, labeling, creating distance. Certain names, particularly those associated with my extended kin, were moved to a limited access group. This meant they would no longer see my casual posts, my artistic endeavors, or the everyday glimpses of my Tucson, Arizona existence. My private life, previously an open book for anyone connected to the broader household, was now under a tighter lock and key. It was a subtle shift, yet profoundly significant for me, Taylor Miller, age 32. My home in Arizona, once a place I perceived as exposed within my own digital footprint, now became a sanctuary in every sense. A new routine began to emerge, born from this newfound determination to protect my peace. I stopped automatically picking up the phone when a certain area code flashed across the screen. Text messages from specific relatives went unanswered for hours, sometimes days. The compulsion to explain myself, to justify my choices or my subdued existence, started to wane. There was a sense of reclaiming agency, a subtle power in choosing silence over reactive engagement. The fear that had stalked me, a shadow born from years of criticism, did not completely disappear, but it no longer dictated my responses. It was a quiet rebellion, fought on the small battlefields of daily interaction. One afternoon, during a coffee break at my studio, a colleague, a fellow artist named Lena, remarked on it. Her voice was gentle, a stark contrast to the sharp tones I had grown accustomed to. "You seem different lately, Taylor," she observed, sipping her iced tea. "More centered, maybe?" Her observation landed like a feather, soft but distinct. It wasn't an accusation or an interrogation, merely an acknowledgement. A small knot of tension, which I hadn't realized I was carrying, loosened in my chest. Someone outside my immediate family had noticed, and their perception was one of strength, not further weakness. This moment, unexpected and simple, provided a surprising validation. It hinted at the possibility that my internal shifts were outwardly visible, and perhaps for the better. My mornings, once filled with a vague apprehension regarding what the day might bring from external sources, now possessed a calmer cadence. I focused on my mixed media work, allowing the textures and colors to absorb my attention, rather than letting my mind drift towards potential family dramas. The urge to check social media first thing, to see what news or judgment might have been posted, dissipated. That energy, previously wasted on external anxieties, redirected itself towards my art, towards a more intentional existence. I guarded my information, sharing only what felt genuine and necessary, rather than what was expected. Conversations with people outside my tightest circle became more superficial, carefully curated to exclude topics that might lead back to my private life or the dynamics within my kin. The most potent act of self-preservation, however, came without a word. One evening, scrolling through an old group chat, a relic from a holiday gathering, I saw Sophia's profile picture. Her face, framed by a forced smile, seemed to mock me from the screen. A wave of exhaustion washed over me, a profound weariness concerning the endless cycle of judgment and perceived inadequacy. My thumb hovered over the block option. No explanation. No dramatic announcement, just a final, decisive movement. The simple act felt like drawing a heavy, soundproof curtain across a window that had long let in too much noise. My personal world, once permeable, was becoming fortified. This singular action, uncommunicated and entirely my own, served as my silent declaration of independence. The simmering resolve from weeks prior began to crystallize, hardening into something resilient, something unbreakable. I wasn't searching for a fight, not anymore. My focus had turned inward, on cultivating a quiet strength, a self-reliance that had, for too long, lain dormant. I spent hours in my studio apartment, paint splattered on the old canvas dropcloth, my hands moving with a fresh purpose. This wasn't a desperate attempt at escape. It was an act of creation, a redefinition of my own space, my own worth, independent of any external gaze. Then, the phone rang. It was Mom, her voice trembling. Our father had passed away suddenly, a heart attack in his sleep. The news hit me like a physical blow, stripping away all the carefully constructed layers of my newfound composure. Grief, raw and consuming, replaced the quiet anger. The funeral, a blur of somber faces and hushed condolences, brought the whole extended clan together. a stark contrast to the boisterous Thanksgiving gathering. My elder sibling, Sophia, moved through the crowd with a practiced grace, accepting condolences, a picture of composed sorrow. Our interactions were minimal, strained. We shared a few perfunctory words, but the chasm between us seemed wider than the Grand Canyon. A few weeks later, a formal notice arrived, crisp and official. The reading of Dad's last wishes was scheduled. The setting was a small, rather sterile conference room in a downtown Tucson, Arizona law office. Mom was there, eyes still red-rimmed. Sophia occupied the chair opposite me, her expression unreadable, a slight tension around her jaw. A man, a lawyer with kind but tired eyes, entered the room carrying a thick folder. He introduced himself, then began. He spoke of assets, of properties, of investments. My mind drifted, still processing the immense void Dad had left. Then, his voice shifted, a slight change in cadence. He started reading a specific clause, a section devoted entirely to me, Taylor Miller. My attention snapped back. My daughter, Taylor, the artist. The dreamer has always possessed a spirit of unique vision and profound strength. Her journey may not always have been conventional, but her resilience, her unwavering commitment to her authentic self, has been a constant source of quiet pride for me. I recognize the challenges she has faced, the pressures to conform, and it is my deepest wish that she pursue her creative endeavors without financial burden. A lump formed in my throat, hot and sharp. The lawyer continued, detailing a trust fund established specifically for my artistic career, a substantial sum intended to provide security and freedom. It was more than money. It was validation, a profound affirmation from the one person whose opinion I craved most, delivered from beyond the grave. Dad had seen me, truly seen me, beyond the surface criticisms, beyond the labels. He had known, perhaps better than anyone, the true weight of the words that had been aimed at me, the quiet battles I had fought. He had anticipated my needs, my aspirations, and he had, in his own way, provided a shield. My gaze flickered to Sophia. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. The composed mask had slipped, revealing a flicker of something akin to disbelief, perhaps even resentment. The air in the room thickened, heavy with unspoken emotions. The lawyer concluded his reading, then looked up. "And that," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion, "concludes the reading of your father's will." Stepping out of that office, the harsh Arizona sun felt different on my skin. It wasn't a burning heat. It was a warm embrace. The sting of Sophia's accusation at Thanksgiving, the word weak, it still echoed, but now it was a distant, hollow sound. It no longer held power. Dad's words, inscribed in that legal document, carried a weight far greater, a truth that resonated deep within me. He had, in his final act, presented a testament to my fortitude, a will that recognized my spirit, not my perceived shortcomings. I walked the few blocks back to my car, the urban sounds of Tucson, Arizona, a muffled backdrop. The city felt vibrant, full of possibility, not the suffocating cage it had sometimes seemed. The weight I had carried, loosened in my chest, was now completely gone. I understood, with a clarity that bordered on revelation, that true strength wasn't about avoiding criticism or winning arguments. It was about knowing who you are, deeply and truly, and holding on to that knowledge, even when others try to strip it away. It wasn't about being told. I was strong. It was about knowing it. Reaching my vehicle, I settled into the driver's seat. My phone chimed, a notification from a social media platform. It was a message request, an old group chat with a photo of Sophia as the sender. I hesitated for a moment, my thumb hovering. Then, without a second thought, I tapped the screen. Navigating to the settings, and with a decisive swipe, archived the entire conversation thread, permanently removing it from my active view. The past was exactly that. Past. My road stretched forward, clear and unburdened.